The young Steelers defensive lineman might be a reason why they could be a top 5 group in the NFL. That, the new linebacker, and what might be happening with Anthony Miller at wide receiver here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes on your Pittsburgh Steelers. We bring you your team every day, and we thank you for making us your first listen every day. And today we're joined by a guy who's there every day, Alan Saunders. He's always at the Steelers facility getting something.
I wasn't there today, Chris. I wasn't there today.
This is true. Neither of us were there today because we won't be at a Steelers thing until training camp, players report for training camp in Latrobe on July 27th. That is how long we have until we got to be back out in the field. But let's talk about a few things here. We will get to the news about the new linebacker they signed and what that means, and Anthony Miller, the wide receiver, who tweeted out something that might mean something for the wide receiver group in a bit. We'll get to those in the later parts of the show, but I wanted to start off talking about some of the things that we were talking about with Karl Dunbar, the Steelers defensive line coach, about this defensive line group, and how it relates to the outlook for this defensive line moving forward. Now, Alan, you guys wrote a story on your thing, and it was really just looking at Pro Football Focus rankings and everything, but PFF is projecting the Steelers to maybe have a top 5 defensive front in the NFL this year, which I don't think is I don't think that's going out too much on a limb, because I think that the Steelers have a very talented defensive front. But I think a very big part of this, what could make it that or even better, is if the two young guys that they got, Leal and Benton, truly deliver this year. And they don't have to be superstars this year, but if Leal kind of takes a step up from where we saw him last year, it shows the natural growth that should come from a 3rd round pick in his 2nd year. And if Benton is just a solid run stuffer, I really think that there is that a top 5 prediction there isn't even that aggressive of something to say about this Steelers unit.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that the depth even needs to. I just think the starters are that good. I don't know that there's a lot of. I mean, I don't know what PFF's methodology in this is, and as always, nobody really knows what PFF's methodology is.
I don't know. Yeah.
So that's one of my problems with that website, and then I think they have a lot of good information. I just wish they told us how they made it. But look. I mean, Cam Heyward, really, really good, right? The edge rushers, TJ and Alex Highsmith. I mean, probably the best in the league, right? I mean, Larry Ogunjobi, not a slouch. If that's your 4th best starting defensive lineman, I think you feel pretty good about that. Keeanu Benton, I mean, I think he's a good draft pick and a good scheme fit, and we'll see. DeMarvin Leal, certainly, I just think they have good, their starters are so good that when you have a 2nd round pick and a 3rd round pick, and that's who we're talking about as 5th and 6th guys, that makes for a really good defensive line.
I hear you on that. I think it does. Karl Dunbar, when we were asking them about the youth on the defensive line and what it does, he had a lot to say about Leal's flexibility and what he's able to do in different positions, but also just what having new blood on the defensive line does for the Steelers. Here was Karl Dunbar last week when we got to catch up with him during Steelers minicamp.
For you guys,
Leal's a football player. He's a defensive lineman. He plays inside. He plays outside. He's a smart, athletic kid that you can play almost anywhere on the front of our defense, and I think that makes us more flexible, and it makes him special. I think it's always good to have young blood in the room. It keeps everybody else young, and it keeps me growing as a coach, learning new things to try to get them on the field and do the things. Because sometimes as a coach, you get comfortable with veterans. They're going to give you, but you get a guy like Leal who do this and who do that, and it keeps your eyes on film, and I think having young blood in the room is great.
So Karl Dunbar talking there specifically about the young players. First of all, talking about Leal and what he brings to the table. I did feel, and I said this a lot last year, that Leal, if he didn't get hurt, he could have done a lot more of really good things for the Steelers last year. But the reason why I'm harping on the depth here, Alan, one thing that we've been talking about that is going to be very important, I think, moving forward with how the Steelers front office is operating. When we talked about in the new era of Omar Khan and Andy Weidel being there. Andy Weidel, part of what he did for the Eagles was being able to have those waves of defensive linemen. And not everyone was Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave and things like that, but you had guys coming off the bench who would if an offensive line was tired from dealing with those starters, they better drink some water, because those guys were gonna come hard at them. And I think that's where the Steelers could be with Heyward and Ogunjobi as a 1-2 punch there, with maybe a Benton or a Fehoko going in there in between them if they're going 3-4, and then that next line being Benton and Leal or Fehoko or Armin Watts or any of those guys. I think that they're in a good position to stagger those waves of depth going at people and make it so that, you get to the fourth quarter, Cam Heyward and Ogunjobi, they haven't played 90% of the snaps. They're fresh and ready to go, and maybe even imposing their will a little bit more later in games.
I mean, that's the big takeaway about this spring from DeMarvin Leal is he's just such a pest. And yeah. I love that about him. And he has such energy for a big guy. And I just think man, if I'm an offensive lineman and I got to block Cam Heyward all day, and then you finally wear Cam down a little bit, maybe you start running the ball, you kind of get him hands on his hips a little bit, you're starting to feel good about yourself. And then all of a sudden it's he's out of the game and it's 98 in there being a pain, giant pain in the butt. I think that's a great point about the Eagles and their waves of defenders. What they had is so unique, and I don't really think the Steelers are there yet, but I definitely think they're starting to build that sort of set. I mean, you think about a guy like Nick Herbig also, on the outside, he's not a fully developed player where he's going to be able to sit there and go half a game, but I think he's got a lot of quickness for that position and some little deceptiveness, and hey, if you only have to use them for 10 plays, then it's a changeup for the pitcher. He doesn't have to yeah. You're still going to throw the fastball 90% of the time, but having a really good changeup makes you better, right? Even if you only throw it 10% of the time. I think that's what the Steelers defense is getting with these guys. And also a little bit of flexibility too, right? Herbig is a little guy for an edge. He could probably play off ball. He can run in coverage. Certainly, you're not going to have Alex Highsmith cover very many guys. He can go drop into a flat once in a while, but he's not running down in man coverage, right? Nick Herbig is athletic enough that he could play on the outside and drop into man coverage. Leal's in the field. Does that mean he's a 3-tech, a 5-tech, an edge? I don't know. Benton, is he a nose? Is he I think they've given themselves versatility and options that are just going to make them a lot more difficult to play against, in addition to having that top group that is really good. So, yeah, I mean, I love the depth, and I love the versatility of the depth and the way they can mix and match pieces. And I think another big part of this is there are so many different styles of football just in the AFC North that you need to have some of those different types of players. Keeanu Benton, when the Steelers come out and when they play Cincinnati, he may not leave the bench, and when they play Baltimore, he might play every snap. That's the difference. Because those two offenses are just so different. Very different. Yeah. And obviously, we haven't seen what Baltimore's offense is going to look like this year. But Cleveland, a little bit more of a traditional run heavy team, a lot of 2 tight end. But really, you think about it, what we've seen from those 3 teams the last couple of years has been the Bengals, 3 wide receivers every single play. The Browns, mostly 2 tight end, run first. The Ravens, 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends, 7 offensive linemen, a fullback, an H-back, a quarterback that runs like Tom Rathman. I don't know,
that is a random reference.
Big tough dude, man, hard to tackle. You're not gonna put a nickel corner and say, "Oh, you're responsible for Lamar," right? Mm-hmm. You need big dudes in there and a lot of them, right? And so I just think that they're in a better position to deal with injury, and they're in a better position to deal with different kinds of offenses. You think about last year, they were a pretty good run defense, but they got in some obvious run situations and they struggled. That the Ravens game at home, that Patriots game, they couldn't stop the run at the end. I think they're in better position with the depth they've created to be able to hold up for a whole game and still be able to make those big run stops at the end if they need them.
I hear you. And I think that is a big part of what they need to be able to do is stuffing the run, especially in key situations in the game. It got away from them in some key losses last year. And the Steelers also said, Cam Heyward talked about Brian Flores was a big part of fixing that. He's not there anymore. They need the guys to help with that. I think before even getting to the quarterback, these young guys, they have to be able to stuff the run better than the Steelers' depth players. Moving forward, we'll talk more about that as the offseason goes along. We get a closer look at some of the matchups we'll see. But we got to talk about some of the new moves that are being made or might be being made here by the Steelers in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back in a second here. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel. FanDuel, of course, is America's #1 sports book. And right now, with Major League Baseball in full swing, there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel. Now, if you go to FanDuel Sportsbook right now, FanDuel has a deal for all new customers that gives you a no-sweat first bet, which gives you up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win on FanDuel Sportsbook. And again, that's $1,000 back. So just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. And when you sign up today, you can claim your no-sweat first bet on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Don't miss out on your shot on no-sweat first bet back up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you join FanDuel today by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com. Alan, want to talk to you more here and about a new addition that's made. A report came out that the Steelers have signed a new linebacker, but it wasn't Deion Jones. They didn't trade for Isaiah Simmons. They didn't, get Devin White or some big name guy. They got a Nick Kwiatkoski, a veteran guy who's going to be 30 years old when the season starts. He's actually 30 years old now, but a veteran linebacker who's bounced around the NFL for a bit. Most recently was with the Falcons last year, didn't play much there. But he spent 2 years with the Raiders, 4 years with the Bears. And he comes in as a guy, first of all, a local guy, Bethel Park, from Western PA, and that's awesome and everything. But I look at this move, and they also released safety Scott Nelson officially to make space for this move. But I look at this move, and I don't think this addresses at least the box that I think they need checked as far as another linebacker who can contribute with the top two guys. And I think Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts, solid, good run stuffing starters who can kind of be, guys that handle everything in the middle part of the field. But it makes you wonder, do they see that as a necessity? They brought in Quan Alexander before, at least to talk to him about what the potential is. There's still plenty of time for them to make a move before training camp if they wanted to. But how do you see the addition of a Kwiatkoski impacting their pecking order of the linebacker situation in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, it's not really clear to me. It's not a move that I think has like an obvious, he's there kind of thing. I just think the biggest thing was that they absolutely needed one more body. They only had 5 inside linebackers on the team. You need at least 3 deep to go into training camp, and so they needed a guy. He has good experience. He had a good couple of years with the Chicago Bears when he first came out of West Virginia. Things kind of didn't go well with the Raiders. He signed a big contract there. He played well when he was healthy. Then he got hurt. Then he came back. Couldn't really get back into the lineup. It wasn't playing by the end of his time there. Got cut for cap reasons. Went to the Falcons last year and barely played at all. It was like basically just special teams. And so, he's kind of like a middle of the road guy. He's, to me, I think I just think the Steelers have that, and then there's not an obvious fit where I think there is this glaring need for some coverage skills from their linebacker group.
Yeah.
And not to say that he can't cover, but he's certainly not a specialist, right? He's like more of, more like a general guy. Honestly, kind of like reminds me a little bit of like Rob Spillane in some ways, like similar, like tough, stocky dude, like physical. I just think that they, in the Landon Roberts and in Mark Robinson, they have a lot of that already. Now, Roberts isn't going to play special teams, and I don't think Robinson was a great, he had very limited exposure to special teams last year. So, maybe there's something there. They have Tanner Muse, but I don't know, maybe. So to me, this feels like that now sets up like a competition. Like, who's the number 4 inside linebacker between Kwiatkoski and Tanner Muse. I don't think either of them really bring to the table what the team should be looking for that spot, given the skill sets of the other 3 guys they have there.
I feel you on that. And let's not forget, this has been a mission that the Steelers front office has not accomplished in years, in finding that coverage replacement guy for Ryan Shazier. Because that's what they've been on a hunt to find. That they thought they had that in Devin Bush, and maybe they did for a rookie season because he was solid as a rookie. But obviously, he got injured his second year, never returned back to the way that the trajectory that he was on before that. And it was just like, okay, they need to reset here. But like, if you remember in 2018. When they tried it with John Bostic and they tried to bring that in, it worked for a little bit, but then eventually passing offenses is like, we're going right at those guys. We're going to target the middle part of the field. We're going to wait for you guys to have to drop into a zone because we get mismatches. And then you're going to have, your middle linebacker who's a run stuffer covering Keenan Allen in space. And that's just not going to be something that you want, but it's going to be something that we take advantage of, which every team take advantage. The Steelers do it all the time, even when Matt Canada as offensive coordinator, that's something that they pull off. But that's why I think it's so important that Omar Khan, he's been very aggressive. He's done a lot of things that I think have been stellar as far as setting up this upcoming season. I still think coverage linebacker, a guy who's of a caliber that can be interchangeable with Roberts and Holcomb as your top 2 guys and be a top 3rd guy at your linebacker position. That is a must, in my opinion, if this defense is really going to be a top 5 defense as they want to be.
Yeah, I think, maybe the answer there is Keanu Neal. They did play him there some during OTAs. He talked to me about that, and he said, it's actually really good. He's like, I don't want to, said it's tough to be put in a box. I don't want to put myself in a box. The Cowboys, said, we're moving you to linebacker when they signed him. He didn't have a great year there. He moved on, but he certainly has that in his toolbox. And we've seen him there. I think he looks okay there. In terms of pure coverage, he's pretty much ideal for that role. I think the question then becomes, is he strong enough at that point in the run that they can play him against those Bengals teams where it's like 3 receivers all the time? I think that's the question, is that you almost need, for those teams, you almost need 2-3 down linebackers, right? Because you need someone that can take Joe Mixon out into the flat. You need someone that can run down the field with a tight end and then be able to fill in on running plays, where you're, sometimes you're not even, you're outnumbered. And so I just think they're a guy short there. Whether that's, look, they could have 2-3 down linebackers and they wouldn't need any more, right? That would be the ideal situation. If they had 2 really good starting inside linebackers, they could just play every snap and they didn't have to worry about anybody else. That'd be perfect. They don't have that. I think short of that, they have some run-focused pieces that I like in Roberts and Robinson. I'm just not sure they have the pass half of that arrangement. Maybe that can be Neal. Maybe Neal can just be the pass half sort of thing. But then you're still guessing, though, every time you're out there. Like you're saying, oh, look, Roberts is in the game, so we're going to run our slot receiver at him. Oh, Neal's in the game, so we're just going to hand off, right?
Yeah.
Anytime you have that where you're kind of giving away your defense of weakness by your personnel, it is definitely a disadvantage. And unless they add somebody, I think they're going to be in that. I think they're probably going to be in that regard. I still think even if they're going to do run and pass, they could use some more pass side help than just Keanu Neal.
I agree. It's still a need. So, and this is no shade at Kwiatkoski, but we're talking about, the needs of this team, an experienced, solid or athletic linebacker who fits a specific role. And Kwiatkoski he's not that guy. If anything, he's probably pushing Mark Robinson for the 4th linebacker spot if they were to sign another guy. Because right now he's more so fighting for a third linebacker spot because, in mini camp, it was, Robinson was out there getting a lot of chances, and we talked to him a lot this throughout this off season about what he was able to show now.
And not to be this guy, but like I okay, fine, I have no problem being this guy, but like I like Mark Robinson a lot. I just think the hype has maybe the hype is like here, and Mark is like okay, just forget his name is Mark Robinson and how much you like him, and think about this. Okay, the guy is a second-year former 7th-round draft pick that played about 30 snaps last year, all of which when someone else was hurt against a team that you knew was going to run the football. Like, that's not exactly someone we should just be like future starter. Like, I think we're a little bit ahead of ourselves on Mark Robinson, and I really like him. I'm not saying that because I don't. I just I think he has a lot of work to do, and I think he's let's put it this way. I think he's closer to not making the team than he is to starting. Right? Mm-hmm. Like if we're lining them up there, and so I definitely think
he's making the team. But your point is that like. I would be more shocked that he was a starter on day one than I'd be shocked if he was cut. Oh man, right. He didn't make the team. That's crazy.
Right. I mean, look, if they go out and sign another inside linebacker who likes Quan Alexander, someone they talk to like that, okay,
then he's on the job.
It would not surprise me if he got cut then because he's like we talked about, he's not that good at special teams. Like then your fourth linebacker would just be a special teams guy. So like I think this is a pretty significant. Like of all the places where the Steelers need more help, I think this is number one. To me,
I agree that this is the biggest need, and that's something that we'll definitely talk about more this week as we look at more of the options out there as far as how they're going to fill the roster spots. He's Alan Saunders. I'm Chris Carter. We'll be back in just a minute here. I want to talk about a tweet that Anthony Miller put out. It might be suggesting there's some shakeups coming in the wide receiver room. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com. Alan, we're just chilling on a Monday afternoon, nothing big going on, and then all of a sudden we see this tweet around 4:05 Eastern time where Anthony Miller just says, "Thank you, Pittsburgh," with a black heart emoji in there that comes out, and immediately everyone's like, "Well, guess that means that's done." And Anthony Miller, a guy who like last year in training camp was turning heads for being a slot receiver, then got hurt for the entire season, didn't play, and then he was back for mini camp this year. And this kind of makes sense to me that if they are moving on from him, if that's what that tweet meant, which I think it will mean that. It kind of makes sense to me with all the talent they've added to that room this year. You've gotten big guys like Akeem Butler. You've gotten fast guys like Jordan Byrd. You've gotten veteran guys like Allen Robinson. You still have Miles Boykin. Gunnar Olszewski's still there. All those things line up. But I want to ask you, how does this end up? Like, what's going to be the final pecking order of the wide receivers here with how they're going to use these guys?
Well, it's funny because today I'm doing my first 53-man roster projection. Find it at SteelersNow.com today. So as you're watching this, maybe a few hours later, you're an early bird because I'm not. So like you're not getting that at 7. And so I had Anthony Miller not making the team, and I kind of looked at it and I was like, I just don't see how it works. Like, especially. He just wasn't available this spring. Like he was dealing with, I believe it was a hamstring, and wasn't around and wasn't available. So it was hard to kind of really, stack him up. But I thought like some other guys certainly sort of started to enter that conversation. I also just think, the emergence of Calvin Austin who I think is in a pretty solid spot as their number 4 wide receiver, really limits the utility of like how much would you want? Like, okay, Allen Robinson is going to be
Calvin Austin's name in that mix of guys when I was talking earlier. I was just, but that's how deep they are.
Allen Robinson is going to be the starting slot receiver. Calvin Austin's probably going to be the number 4 and is exclusively a start receiver. Allen Robinson can do everything, right? So do you need another guy who is exclusively a slot receiver and is also not a special teams contributor? Like, I just didn't think it worked out. And so And the injury's frustrating. Best abilities, availability, missed all last year, banged up again this year. And so I think, that's probably what the story is there. But, I thought, look, Anthony Miller was going to make this team last year. Like, he had a really good training camp.
He was looking solid.
And even like before they got Robinson, I was like, he's probably as good of a slot option as anybody else for this year. It just seems like a couple guys passed him. And I thought some of those less herald, like Des Fitzpatrick, I thought was like really impressive to me during OTAs as a guy that I didn't really have super high expectations for that came in. Hakeem Butler is tantalizingly big and fast and certainly has some securing the catch issues. But, I just think, to me, this makes it seem like either they're not going to keep 6 wide receivers, and I think that's a possibility because looking at the kickoff changes, like, are they really going to need like last year they had Gunnar Olszewski, Steven Sims, and Miles Boykin, who were all key like multiple phase special teamers from the wide receiver position. If we're not returning any kicks, like do we really need 3 of those? Like could they get by with 2? They've got some tough cuts somewhere else. So, I mean, I think just maybe there's only 5 receivers they want, or if there are 6, probably a good sign for Gunnar, probably a good sign for Hakeem Butler, Miles Boykin. Like, there's a lot of guys there. I just think it's deep and wasn't healthy, and that's probably what's going on there.
I hear you on that. Health is definitely a part of this year, but it's a packed receiver room with guys who give you different skill sets, and not a packed receiver room of proven threats that will just flourish this year. I'm not saying all that, but your 1-2 punches, Johnson and Pickens. Those are the guys. Allen Robinson being the next guy out there who you just plug in the slot and can move around a little bit and gives you some flexibility with those top 3 guys. Calvin Austin, the speed that he brings to the table, and frankly, I think that Calvin Austin, not just the speed, but I think that what he could do with the ball in his hands, I also think he's going to be a better receiver with his hands than people might expect. I think that he will be able to be formidable in that respect. It's going to give you a lot of flexibility, and then it gives again, when you're talking about those are your top 4 guys. Who do you keep around for a 5th and a 6th option? Gunnar Olszewski's still there. Miles Boykin's still there. Hakeem Butler's still there. It's going to be some tough decisions here, and there's going to be some Steelers fans who have their training camp darlings that are going to get their hearts broken, and by somebody. It happens every year. There's somebody like, oh man, like who was the Tuzar Skipper? That was the big one, years ago, where it was like, oh man, Tuzar Skipper, he's going to be this, he's going to be James Harrison, and then he was cut, and it was like, what? How did that happen? But I look at this receiver group and I see they've got speed, they've got route runners, they've got size. That is a really great mix to have on an offense that ultimately still you're not planning to air the ball out a whole lot here. Kenny Pickett is not going to be throwing, I don't think, 500 times this season. Like maybe not even 400 times if the Steelers have their way with the way they want to run the football. And I think that that's totally fine when you look at the assortment of talents that you have on the roster, but it could create some real big mismatch opportunities if the Steelers are creative enough, and if they're good enough at running the football and forcing defenses into some different personnel sets. That could be a big key to making life easier for Kenny Pickett and throwing the ball down the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a good. It adds up to I think is a lot more opportunities for Pickett. I also think it's going to be more impactful in the running game. I mean, Allen Robinson's a good blocker. Calvin Austin has the tools to be an elite jet sweep guy. I think that's certainly going to be a part of their offense in terms of whether it's jet sweep or a bubble or moving. Make probably the biggest core tenet of the Matt Canada offense is making defenses defend the entire width of the field. That's part of what a jet sweep is doing. I think having that speed out there is going to be a big deal. And I think Frisman Jackson made a really good point that like George Pickens has a lot of room to grow too. Like this could be a really good receiving core. But
I think it could.
I think we're compared to like the defense, right, where we just talked earlier in the show, top 5 defense. I think we're doing a lot more projecting with the wide receivers.
Yes.
Like,
there's a lot of hoping and thinking what
and
could
I think
happen.
there's talent and there's ability to get things done, but I think we're talking about guys, and even we had a long conversation not that long ago. How good is Diontae Johnson? Is he an elite wide receiver? Is he just very good? Like, I think the guys at wide receiver we're talking about, they all sort of have the tools and the skills to be really good, but none of them have really proven it yet. Whereas they have done that, especially for that top flight of guys on defense. And then, we're maybe doing some projecting with those underneath the table guys. Whereas on offense, I think really all of them are kind of, there is hope for them to be better than they've been, but they haven't gotten there yet.
I hear you. They haven't gotten there yet. And again, the hope is nice. And I think that but this is part of every roster. And I'll finish on this point. Every roster has parts of it that you're very, very confident about, that you feel awesome and excited, to see what they're going to do. And they have parts of the roster that, either you're dismayed, you're like, this is going to be a rough year with those guys, or B, you're like, okay, these guys are unproven, but we like some of the things that they're bringing to the table. And if they hit on a couple things, that group could be a group that we're just as excited about moving forward. And I think that's where the Steelers wide receiver room is right now. This isn't a group that you're looking at and thinking like, well, they're going to be bad. It's a group that you're looking at and it's like, hey, they have some strengths, but they could have more strengths if these guys deliver. And that's what we're looking at with some of these younger guys here. And we'll see what happens with the Anthony Miller situation. He hasn't officially been released as of us recording this podcast, 9:19 p.m. on a Monday evening here in mid-June. But if he is, what other room does that make for the Steelers? We'll talk about that when it happens here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Alan, thanks so much again for joining us here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At @Saunders_PGH on Twitter, at PGH Steelers Now is the site, SteelersNow.com. We got that 53-man roster projection I teased earlier. Also starting our All 90 offseason series where we'll write one big story about every player on the team. We wrote about Allen Robinson yesterday. I think we got Patrick Peterson coming today, starting with a couple heavy hitters, and we going through those all through these 5 or so weeks until we get to training camp.
I hear you. It's gonna be a fun ride. Go to SteelersNow.com to get all of Alan's work along with Nick Farabaugh and their team there. Thanks again, Alan, for joining us. I'm your host, Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, where I write on all things Pitt athletics. You can also find my work here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Monday through Friday, every day, breaking things down on your Pittsburgh Steelers. We appreciate everyone who checks us out every day and makes us their first listen. And if you want to support the show, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a shout out at the end of the show. Like this video, subscribe to it if you're enjoying this show and you want more great content. We'll be back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.